Good evening, everyone. We're going to start the meeting now. My name's Councillor Alex Worrell. I chair this panel. This is the Housing, Planning and Development Scrutiny panel. Can I just quickly ask the panel members to my left to introduce themselves?
Hi, my name's Tammy Hymas. I'm the councillor for St Anne's Ward.
I'm Dawn Barnes. I'm councillor for Fortis Green.
Hi, I'm Khalid Muid, Labour councillor for Knoll Park.
John Bevan, councillor, Northumberland Park.
Isidor's Diakidis, councillor for Tottenham Central.
Thank you. And can I please ask the officers and cabinet member to my right to introduce themselves?
My name's Philip Glover. I'm the scrutiny officer.
Sorry. Hi, I'm David Joyce, Director of Placemaking and Housing.
Councillor Sarah Williams, cabinet member for Housing and Planning.
I'm Scott Kay, the head of Residential Building Safety.
Christian Carlisle, Assistant Director of Asset Management.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Prothero, Head of Home Ownership.
Alfie Peacock, Senior Project Manager for Energy.
Thank you. And just to note, we've slightly changed the agenda around for this evening. So we're going to take the item about fire safety directly after the deputation because we thought it might be of interest to the people who are here for the deputation. All right, so the first item is filming at meetings. Can I just refer everybody to the information published on the first page of the agenda? If you're present at this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed. Item 2 is apologies. So I've had apologies from Councillor Gordon because none of the items this evening are in her portfolio. And I've had apologies from Councillor Harrison Mullane. I think that's it. Yep. Item 3, urgent business. There are no items of urgent business. Item 4, declarations. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? No? Okay. So item 5, deputations. We have received a deputation from Defend Council Housing. Shall I read out what it's about? Yeah, okay. So if you could please have your speakers come up. So if it's all right, you've got 3 minutes to kind of introduce, and then we'll take some questions from the panel to the people who are deputising. And we've got roughly about 15 minutes for the whole thing. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, and then if you can get going, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's Paul Burnham and Michael Hodges here. We were shocked to hear that all 80 Haringey council housing blocks of 5 stories or above have life critical fire safety defects. 46 blocks with combustible external panel systems and 80 blocks with defective fire doors and compartmentation defects. It gets worse because this has not been reported candidly to residents or to councillors. I live in Newbury House in Wood Green. This block has 15 floors, a single staircase and defective fire doors. There are 6 vertical ribbons of combustible composite window panels up the sides of the building with 360 square metres of it in all. And this block has been rated at tolerable risk of fire, which means that no major expenditure is necessary. Senior council management are aware of that and agree with that rating. Mr. Kay, the head of residential building safety, contends that the composite panels on Haringey's housing blocks are not comparable with the whole facade cladding at Grenfell before the fire. Mr. Kay states in an email exchange that the more limited amount of combustible cladding at Grenfell before its refurbishment was safe, quoting a newspaper article as evidence of that. Mr. Kay explains that council policy is that the combustible panels should be replaced on the normal timescale of window replacement programme, the industry standard for which is 30 years. We say that this approach to fire safety is completely wrong. And as evidence, I would look at the test report on the window panels at Newbury House. The report says that a fire in the living room or the bedroom could spread onto the balcony of any of the 85 flats and ignite the window panels. And then, quote, "It is reasonably foreseeable that fire could travel vertically, compromising panels above and the other flats above. This installation may assist with rapid fire and smoke spread internally and externally." End of quote. So to have a fire catastrophe, it's not necessary to have exactly the same panel system as at Grenfell or the same failures as at Grenfell. A tower block is already a high-risk building with multiple sources of ignition and with complex and highly fallible management systems. So the combustible panels could spread fire up the outside of a tower block in this borough. We also have cost-cutting policies, defective fire risk assessments, outsourcing, and I believe complacent management as well. So sadly, all of the elements for a major fire disaster are in place in this borough. Just to remind you, the government policy is that all combustible materials should be removed urgently from the external walls of tall buildings.
Can I ask you to
And
conclude,
I'll then
please?
say, thanks. I'll then just recommend that you refer back the fire safety report you have on your agenda, which does not mention life critical safety faults once, and we welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for keeping to time. Do I have any questions from the panel? Good.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Paul and Mike, for your deputation and the remarks that you've made and the representations that you've made, which I've listened to attentively. There's a lot of technical detail in there, so please forgive me if I don't fully understand everything. But I think the sum of what you've said is the tower blocks that we have in Haringey, they all are at major fire risk. I mean, that is what I've understood from what you've said. What I'm keen to understand from you is, what is your ask? What should be done?
What we're asking you to do is what they're asking the council to do is to quite frankly be honest and open about the level of risk. This has not been the case before, and to work out a plan to do the remediation on the blocks and to explain what remediation has happened since Grenfell. There's so much that we don't know. It would be really useful. I understand you've already put forward your plan of work. It would be for the forthcoming period. It'd be really helpful if you were to do a piece of work on this and find out what has happened since Grenfell, what is proposed to happen in future. The other thing that's really important is that, I mean, this situation is not about a difference of opinion about fire safety between the Haringey Council and the British government. It's actually about underfunding of council housing. It's actually about there not being adequate resources to manage and maintain the existing properties and deal with fire safety and build new homes. All of those are necessary. There's not enough funding for them. And it would be really helpful if this council, alongside with other local authorities and with tenants, was to go up and put a case to government. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, thanks again for coming, because it does no harm to get extra scrutiny on regulations such as this concerning fire. And I'm sure everyone's sort of checked that everything's being done okay. All the officers have put a bit more focus on ensuring it's all being done as best and as good as possible. But I think one of the things you raised was the main contractor subcontracted some of the work to another contractor. Now, I'm not an expert in procurement. I don't know if that's permissible, but I do know that in the construction industry, this issue of subcontracting all the way down the line, so that the last person doing the work is doing it for as cheap as possible, because he's getting hardly any money left. So I know it's only one subcontractor, but I don't know if the officers can say if that's okay, or but I think that's one of your concerns.
It's very much our concern. As you pointed out, this is rife in the construction industry. One of the things that the council provided for me was a set of rules for those who carry out fire risk assessments, and it's very notable. It doesn't say that you can't sub the work out to somebody else. It's really important, as you pointed out, that you can give the contract to one company and then they sub it out to others. Now, this appears to have happened with a large part of the fire safety function that we're so concerned about. What I call the cost-cutting turn. There's been a very sharp turn towards fairly aggressive cost-cutting in this area, and it's been done working in partnership with an external partner. But when I then asked, I tried to find out whether this external partner, Inline Safety Limited, had been appointed by the Cabinet. I couldn't find out whether they'd been appointed. I then wrote a letter, official complaint. But the answer that came back is we don't have any dealings with them. We don't know who they are. These are the company writing most of the fire risk assessments, doing the tests on the fire doors and so on. And when I checked, went onto the website of this particular company, they have success stories, as many companies do, have success stories. One of their first success story is reducing the fire safety costs of a company they worked at, organisation they worked for, by 98%. Their third success story is reducing fire safety costs by 99.8%. It's very clear that this is about a pretty hard line cost-cutting agenda, and that's what we see when you have blocks like Newbury House and John Keats House rated as a tolerable risk of fire when they have all these problems which they need to be sorted out. That is a way, you see, of cutting costs, because under the strategy of worst first, which we agree with. So in other words, if you've got some blocks which have the worst problems, you do the work on those first. If that's the approach that's taken, then my block and John Keats House are going to be at the back of the queue, because we've got a label around our neck, a tolerable risk of fire, even though we've got these combustible panels, even though the fire doors are not being fixed, etc., etc. So it's really problematic. And I'll just say that, yes, it's really problematic, and it'd be really useful to have some scrutiny examination of exactly how this is working out and how it happened.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions? Can I just ask a question of my own first? So you mentioned about kind of disagreeing with the council's position about Grenfell and the refurbishment, and the fact that it was the fire wouldn't have happened in the way that it did before the refurbishment. Can you kind of say why that is, why you disagree with that?
Yes, because the Grenfell fire was a failure of multiple systems. It wasn't just a failure of one particular defective form of cladding. It was also a failure of the way that the cladding was marketed, for example. It was also a way of the example of the lack of building control. It's also failures by the fire service management, etc. And also a failure of governments. There's a whole series of failures which led to it. And the same is true of the tower blocks in Haringey. They are complex. It's a complex venture. The block which I live in, for example, has, I think it's 14 or 15 different monthly safety checks which have to be done by the council. There are maintenance of all the different aspects of it, and that what it seems to me causes a major fire is obviously the fact that the building's at risk, obviously the start of the fire and the fire load, but also the fact that there are combustible panels where it is possible for the fire spread to take place. This doesn't mean that every fire, it's certainly not true that every fire in a council flat becomes a major fire and people are killed or injured. That's not the case. But the problem is that the risk is there. The risk was there at Grenfell. It wasn't seen at the time properly, although it should have been. And if you look at what's happening in Haringey, exactly is the same is taking place here. There are so many things going on that are placing residents at risk from fire then that ought not to be happening.
We need to wrap up quite shortly. So do you mind if I just take the last couple of questions as a group, and then if you could just answer them as best you can in the next kind of couple of minutes? So yeah, Tammy, Dawn.
I just wanted to come in on, I just wanted clarification on the number of blocks with defective doors and if you know how many, because we have had reports on defective fire doors, but I just wanted to get the information that you have received by your questioning. And then I just wanted to come back on the safety checks and the honest and open openness about the level of risk. So what you're saying is that yours is at a grade 5, and so it's not seen as a high risk. Was that correct? Your property wasn't seen as a high risk property, so it won't be
Tolerable risk of fire, which
it's
means
not
that
seen as
no
high
money
risk.
needs to be spent.
So would you be looking for something like a regrading or a renumbering of those priorities to assist with residents understanding the risk that they live in? It's not going to change the priorities, I wouldn't have thought, because if somebody's at the highest risk, they're going to be higher if there's a regrading. But would that be helpful in terms of the communication with residents about the level of risk, which you've asked to be honest and open?
And then do we have, so Khaled and then Isidoris?
Yeah, this is a follow-up. So in response to my question, you kindly said 3 things that need to be done. Firstly, that we need to be open and honest about the current state of play. Secondly, you've said that we need to work out what remediation measures need to be taken place and do it. Thirdly, you've said, and you've acknowledged that there is underfunding from central government, that we should lobby government for the extra funding that's required. Now, 2 of those things don't cost any money, being frank and open, the first one, third one, lobbying the government. So we should certainly make note. And as far as this committee is concerned, we can ask the leadership of council to lobby the government. So that's one of the asks. And in terms of being open and frank about the current status quo, again, my request to the committee to take that on board and to see what we can do about that. Now, turning to your other thing, which is to work out the remediation measures and to do it, as you've yourself identified, that we won't have sufficient funding because there is underfunding. So do you acknowledge that with the best will in the world, we just won't have the money to do and to achieve the gold standard that perhaps you desire?
Isidoris?
I think I just want to understand the crux of your argument, what exactly you're saying. I need a little bit more clarification on 2 things. If I understand from the correspondence as well that you had with the department and so on, the crux on the one hand is that while previously assessments was giving blanket kind of like sort of like orders, if I put it that way, we got to change all these doors or something like this. Now it comes a new way on which you say, no, hang on, some of those can wait for a bit longer and then it will be subject to assessment, etc. And in one sense, I couldn't see anything wrong if, let's say, not having done a detailed survey, we say, let's make a decision nevertheless to change 100 doors. Well, probably if somebody can think of a way that without risking anything, half of those doors can be saved, if you like, it can be used again, save some money, that kind of stuff. So is that really the basic thing is that instead of having more broadband blanket kind of like things, say, the doors there, the cladding, etc., in this particular blocks are not safe. Therefore, we have to change them, as opposed to try to get to find ways on which we avoid it. So that's the first question. The second, in your closing statements in particular, you refers to the government regulations, implying that we don't comply with them. And that is a bit obviously worrying, anything that we got to discuss. Is that something you can explain a bit more, pin it down exactly so that we can ask the officers afterwards, to clarify ourselves and satisfy ourselves as well?
Thanks. As briefly as you can, but I know there's a lot of points there. Thanks.
Okay, I'll have a go at most of those. Firstly, the information that we had came from the regulator. These were reports that Haringey Council sent to the regulator. It's not. Yes, we need to communicate with residents. You need to tell people that the problem is here, and then we need to work on it as a group. That's not been the case, quite frankly, and it needs to be the case. On the question of funding, do we accept that there's not enough funding? No, I don't accept that for a minute. We don't know unless the question is asked, unless the priority is raised. We don't actually know that. I have noted that the fire safety budget of this council from the capital account of the housing revenue account, is £37 million over the next 5 years. I've sent in some questions, and I think that you as a committee should be sending in some questions to try and find out where that money is being spent, what's been achieved, and so on. And then we can have a discussion afterwards. What else? Is there a need for comprehensive? Replacement? Often there is. You will understand it, Adoros. I think we all understand in council housing that quite often it's a case where every component is actually replaced. That's the economic way to do it. That's the way that the industry works, if those components are found to be defective. Now, just on fire doors, I could mention that there was a situation a number of years ago where Haringey Council bought a large number of fire doors from a provider. And when the council asked the provider to provide evidence that the fire doors were actually compliant, that evidence was not forthcoming. That led to lengthy legal arguments. Whether that's been resolved, I don't know. I think that's a question we need to find out. And and changing government policy is absolutely central. So I'll just finish on this. Since the general election, the local government association, the representatives of the housing associations and the Chartered Institute of Housing have written a letter to the government saying, basically, your promises not to spend money are not going to work because we have a dire need of money and it needs to be forthcoming. 20 Labour local authorities, led by Southwark, wrote again, asked boldly, asking for very large amounts of money and a settlement that will allow councils to do the things that we all agree they need to do over a period of time. So it seems to me the door is open. We need to get in there and start pushing to get some of these things that we need. And I think that everybody will understand why it is that fire safety is important. Everybody will understand, quite frankly, that some of the things that have happened in this borough up to now have not been good enough. So let's resolve it and improve it going forward.
All right, thanks for your deputation. I'm going to bring this item to a close for now. You're very welcome to join us for the next item or the rest of the meeting if you want, but you're welcome to head off whenever. So thank you. Like I said, we're going to now take the item on the Fire Safety Action Plan. That's to be introduced by Scott Kay and Councillor Williams. Before we start, I just wanted to say it is really uncomfortably hot in this room. So if anybody wants me to kind of pause the meeting for a few seconds so you can get some water or splash water on your face, just give me the nod. Okay, so take it away on the Fire Safety Action Plan, please.
prioritises safety. We've spent 20 million on new fire doors, 4 million on smaller fire actions. We've got a completed high-rise structural survey, and we've started doing other fire risk appraisals in walls. So this is all work in train at the moment, but I'll hand over to Scott.
Thank you. So this scrutiny panel report is on our fire safety action plan. It covers 4 key areas around our housing improvement plan and our approach to fire risk assessments. It covers our approach to complying with the Fire Safety England regulations 2022 and the Building Safety Act. All have implications for the council and its residents on fire safety, and this report just gives an overview in relation to each of those areas. As Councillor Williams said, we have a new asset management strategy in place that prioritises safety, and we've also completed, I'm sure as Christian, the asset management strategy we'll cover later, we've completed a stock condition survey. We're undertaking a number of surveys so that, as I think was mentioned earlier, we can undertake works to windows, internals, externals, all inclusive of fire safety doors at the same time, so that we're not constantly returning, putting up scaffolding, taking it down, putting it up again. And we've implemented a new programme of repairs based on fire safety. And as Councillor Williams said, we are also launching a programme of £20 million over the next 5 years to upgrade fire doors, which is one of the major concerns of the deputation. And I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you. Can I just, this is optional, but can I just start by asking if you would like to comment on the deputation or sort of provide any more specific response to the points that have been raised there?
I think one of the aspects that was raised was the issue around the response to the comments that Grenfell wouldn't have happened if the cladding hadn't been put on. And I think the deputation referred to me quoting a newspaper article. I was actually quoting a report from a company called BRE Global, who are a renowned fire investigation team. And that was their actual statement that said the fire wouldn't have happened. It would have been contained to the flat of origin had they not put the additional cladding on. And if you look at the Grenfell building beforehand, it's very similar in a layout to a number of our buildings with just the infill panels. And that's not to say we don't in any way treat that as okay. We have to do it, but as has already been mentioned, we have to do that through a thorough planned programmed approach with other fire safety works. There's not a lot of point in doing one part of fire safety works in isolation to others, because you just put a sticking plaster over it. So and also with regards to fire risk assessments, it takes the holistic view of the building in terms of the way it's occupied, the means of escape, the width of doors, the width of stairwells for fire brigade to get in and access the building as much as for people to get out. So it looks at things in the whole rather than just some physical characteristics of the building.
Thanks. And so obviously one of the points in the deputation was reference to there being kind of combustible cladding on all of the, all 80 of the high-rise blocks. Sorry, yeah, a lot of them. Just wanted to ask if you could pick up on sort of why we haven't had that data presented in that way in this report, and kind of the way that you have chosen to, present the risks and the prioritization and everything.
I think the report was framed about our approach to dealing with the issues, and one of the issues that we have is as it confirms in there, is that we've had to provide information on all of our buildings to the building safety regulator, and the fact that we are developing a new asset and investment programme based with the number one priority of that being building safety and fire safety. So we are looking at the information around spandrel panels, again has been provided to the building safety regulator. We've uploaded all of that information. We've also shared that information with the London Fire Brigade, who regularly visit our buildings, and they're aware of the fire risk assessments, the buildings themselves, and our intentions for programmes and completing those.
Yeah, come in.
Just add one point to that, which is that as director, myself and the senior team meet with the borough fire commander and his team monthly, and we look at a number of issues, including the programs that Scott has described, but we also tend to review any serious fire instance that we've had and any learning from those jointly as a team. We also talk about emerging risks, things like e-scooters and batteries and those kind of things. So, and that is attended by our colleagues from housing management, from housing demand in relation to temporary accommodation, but also Scott and other senior colleagues. So it's a very useful forum where we come together regularly. And as Scott says, the borough commander and his team are very happy to sort of go out and visit specific areas of concern.
Thanks. I'm going to come to the panel now. Tammy?
Yeah, my question is about evacuation. And I know that one building, Stella House, currently has a evacuation plan rather than a stay put. So I'm wondering how many buildings that we are responsible for currently have a evacuation plan. And how has that been assessed, basically?
So all of our high-rise and higher-rise buildings have a stay put strategy. That is the base strategy, unless, and that's our policy, unless there is a reason to have an evacuation strategy. Lower rise, less complex properties, street properties have an evacuation policy, and they have alarm systems in and early warning systems in. The high rise don't, and some of the rationale behind that is depending on the building's characteristics, and often the most effective way of dealing with a fire is the fire brigade to get into the building as quickly as possible. If there are one or two fairly narrow stairways, then the fire brigade would have difficulty getting into the building if hundreds of people were coming out of the building at the same time. So one of the best ways to do is to ensure that each compartment or each flat provides the half-hour fire resistance required, which allows the fire brigade to get there in time, deal with the fire, and to prevent it from spreading throughout the building.
So the Stella House now has a stay put evacuation plan since works have been done.
Yeah, sorry, no, not yet. So the works haven't been completed yet, which is why it's still on an evacuation. So it was on a stay put. It was moved to an evacuation because of the way in which the panels are fitted to the building and the volume of them compared to other buildings and other characteristics of the building. It was identified through the panel testing that was an extremely high risk in relation to Stella House and the way it was laid out and the physical characteristics. Therefore, we worked with the fire brigade and agreed and recommended that we should move to an evacuation strategy. So we fitted an alarm system so that there's an early warning system so people can evacuate, and the fire brigade are aware of that, and they need to be made aware that it's changed strategy and agree it. And we've fitted the alarm system in conjunction with the building control as well, so they're aware of what we've done. So all the key authorities and stakeholders are aware of what we've done and why we've done it, and we've done that as a temporary measure until such time as Christian's team can undertake the major works and replace the windows, and then we can move back to a stay put strategy.
So just finally then, even though some of the buildings such as Paul's building that he raised, we're happy having assessed that despite there is some concern around the cladding on the external part of the building, that a stay put strategy remains the best approach.
Yeah, and that is recommended by the fire risk assessor. The fire risk assessor has the duty to undertake the assessment and risk identify the building, and they don't risk identify or make decisions on buildings based on what other buildings do and look like. They make it on the actual building at the time, and our fire risk assessors all have to I mean, we have internal risk assessors and we have 2 vacant posts, and we're having great difficulty attracting people because of the way the market is at the moment. It's a very competitive market, but we had a very strict and high threshold of qualification and assurance and certification when we went out to tender for a fire risk assessment company, and the company that we use meet that. They're members of the Institute of Fire Engineers, and they use additional resources such as a sub-consultant who are also had to meet the same level of characteristics to be able to do it for us. So they have a high level of competency around fire risk assessments and experience with a number of other councils and social housing providers.
We're just confident that all the high-rise buildings have been assessed and that they have the right strategy in place.
They've all been assessed. They all have a current fire risk assessment. For all of our high-rise buildings as well, we've introduced building safety managers, and they are on site. They undertake at least monthly inspections. We have a clear communal areas policy managed by our estates team. We provide information to residents around the safety and fire doors through our newsletters and website. And I say the building safety managers on site are very much they're very much a visual presence. They engage with the residents about any concerns, and we've given residents direct contact with those people if they've got any concerns whatsoever about safety in the building.
Thank you. Councillor Moeed.
I'm trying to understand the table at 6.9, paragraph 6.9 of the report. There we can see that as at January 2023, there were 4,120 high-risk overdue actions. And this represents around 50% of all overdue actions. And this figure goes down as at 28th of June 2024. I'm only looking at the higher risk actions that are overdue, 1,497. So what is the definition of something that is high risk? To me, as a layperson, when I see that, I would think something that poses imminent risk. But if these high risk are left overdue, for example, 4,000 year and a half ago, and we still have nearly 1,500 a year and a half later, should we be alarmed? I mean, how does this work?
Sorry. And that's exactly why we part of the reason we self-reported to the regulator and committed to a voluntary undertaking with the regulator to clear that backlog of actions. And we've put a number of programs in place to deal with those. So we've put new contracts in place, and that's why we've been able to see a dramatic reduction in the number of risk of those actions, and we're focusing on them. So yes, we agreed it wasn't acceptable, the amount of time it's taken, and that's why we've put these programs in place to reduce that number significantly.
And when do we expect the remaining actions to be completed?
We have a number of programs which we're asking. We've now appointed a number, I think 6 or 7 contractors to focus on those actions, and we've asked the contractors who've been working for the past few months on those to give us a forecast, a run rate on each particular set of actions they have, to give us a forecast. So we haven't got that at the moment, but we're hoping sometimes by December, we anticipate sort of December time, we should be able to have them cleared. But until we get the actual rate from the contractors, we can't really confirm that.
Investigations are in place whilst those are in place.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the other thing to note as well is that, so we are, as Councillor Williams just reminded me, putting a number of mitigations in place whilst we do that. So again, we have our risk assessments with the building safety managers in place. We've identified where we need to, some of those works, and we've identified where we need to put in additional alarms or extend alarm systems whilst we're doing those works. So we are putting other mitigations in place as well.
Yeah, Councillor Diakides.
I think just on the same table, just playing the devil's advocate, what my colleague pointed out, between January 23 and June 24, we reduced the high priorities from 400 to 500 roughly. Is that because we did something, or is it because we just got an assessor who said, well, you don't need to do that, you don't need to do that? It's a huge difference. I mean, that's part of what we were discussing with the delegation before. Just give me some assurance. These are actually actions taken and not simply reclassifying that we don't need them anymore to do these actions.
No, so each action is a result of an observation or a suggestion by a fire risk assessor, and it might be that the fire risk assessor wasn't able to view a document, wasn't able to identify something. So, for example, if the fire risk assessor wasn't able to see in a sheltered housing scheme evidence of the fire test and the alarm certificates or the fire tests, then that would be considered a high risk action because of the environment. As soon as we could find that we were able to identify and locate a copy of that, we were then able to close the action. Another action could be a replacement of a fire door, which we may or may not have done, but we would not close an action unless we've got the relevant evidence. All actions have to have a statement or a link to a piece of evidence or a document to prove why we've closed that. So there's an audit trail for every action that's been closed.
Does Christian want to come in?
Sorry, just to add on the discussion around Stella House, we are in the process of procuring major works contract for Kenneth Robinson Stella House. We're just about to start the leaseholder consultation with a view to awarding later this calendar year and start on site in the new year, which will address a number of the issues raised around the windows and fire safety works.
Councillor Diakides can come back, and then Councillor Barnes.
Okay, thanks. Just generally, again, from the deputation, I started having some thoughts about it, but did I understand it right that as regards the fire assessments, fire risk assessments, we have a contractor to do surveys, and the contractor, a private contractor, and the private contractor has a subcontractor to specialize on fire safety. Is that the thing? First of all, just to understand how it works, and where do the council's own staff, don't have any capacity ourselves to do these assessments? And in the long run, that's the first thing. Can you tell me who is the main contractor, first of all, because nowhere in the papers or so, and give me some indication of how much they cost.
Okay, so we have a fire safety consultancy that was procured through our DPS procurement system, and the consultancy that we have the contract with is a company called Faithorn, Farrell and Timms. Faithorn, Farrell and Timms. They are a multidisciplinary consultancy that also specialise around fire safety. They provide the management, administration and quality assurance, and they subcontract to an asbestos specialist consultancy who go out and do the actual surveys. So they go out and do the fire risk assessments, create the fire risk assessment document. They have their own internal quality assurance process. They then provide it to Faithorn, Farrell and Timms, who our contract is with. They undertake a level of quality assurance, and then the fire risk assessments are passed to us, and then we review them, and if we're happy with them, we count that as a compliant fire risk assessment, and then we extract the actions and add the actions.
That point, if I may, so they are not doing any of the work, they're simply doing assessments, and they give us the figures, right? And roughly how much we spent on that one, on these assessments every year?
Yeah, I can't remember the actual contract value, but I can come back. I think it was about, I think it's a 5-year programme for about £4 million off the top of my head, I think was the actual. Well, they do, yeah, we do roughly 1,650 fire risk assessments a year.
Just the thing. I vaguely remember that in past, much more prosperous times, we had our own safety officers that did these assessments, and we had the in-house teams, if you like, and the housing department at the time, and would be able to do all the assessments, ties with the asset management plan actually before as well, with all that kind of thing. Have we considered that at all? Because it does sound spending a hell of a lot of money on those things and not keeping even the knowledge, if you like, inside in the organization as we used to.
Yeah, so the contract value is not only for fire risk assessments, they also undertake, so the latest Fire Safety Act requires us to carry out quarterly inspections of every communal door. As you can imagine, there are quite a number of those, and that's to be done every 3 months, and also annual inspections of every flat entrance door in buildings over 5 stories or 11 meters high. So there's a number of those as well. So they also carry out some of those. Now, they don't do all of the fire risk assessments, and they don't do all of those door inspections because we also have 2 in-house fire risk assessors. We have 2 vacancies for 2 fire risk assessors. As I mentioned earlier, we've had difficulty recruiting fire risk assessors because the market is so competitive at the moment. And the other part of that is the consultants also provide independent sort of technical support and guidance and information around what's going on in the sector around fire safety and good practice and guidance as well, which we use to improve what we do.
Councillor Barnes, and then we'll come to you, John Bevan.
Thank you. Going back to the table, obviously this says the report self-reported overdue actions and has a number. Have there been additional overdue actions reported within the period, or has it just gone down and no new ones have come in? Was my first question. And my second is about how a resident might report what they perceive as a risk or something that needs fixing in their property. As councillors, we all have a lot of casework relating to repairs that may be long overdue or have been reported 3 weeks ago and not yet been done, and a resident would be very keen for that to happen. Are they kind of scored if they are a fire door, for example, or a communal door, so that they are a higher priority for the service to go and fix them because there's a higher risk attached? And are residents able to report those perhaps within a different framework to make sure they're flagged accurately?
So I think with regards to the first question, yes, there's a constant churn of risk assessment actions. As each year, when the fire risk assessor goes, things in the building may have changed. Something might have been damaged. The tenants might have set up a barbecue on their balcony or something like that. So every type of action will be recorded, and then when it's then reviewed against the previous action, we determine whether it's already been reported, in which case we don't overwrite it because that would change the date. We stick with the original date so that we're not sort of falsely saying this is a new action. We keep the original action, and then we know it still needs to be done. So we track that through an action tracker and our plan and our program of actions. So yes, there are new actions coming in and there are actions, but this was the one we specifically reported to the regulator. So we needed to keep a track on those particular actions. The other question, sorry.
That was around if a resident is reporting something they see in their property or external spaces that needs to be fixed. Is there a way that can be flagged as a fire risk, and would a resident know to even make that part of their?
Yeah, so there is information on our on Haringey's website. If you have any issues about fire safety, there's a specific fire safety email address. In high-rise buildings as well, we now have the building safety managers, so anybody can report any concerns around building safety, whether it's fire or antisocial behaviour that's impacting on building safety, and also through our general repairs reporting line. And if our customer service team receive a report that's to do with fire safety, they immediately pass it through to the fire safety team.
So can I just add one point, which is for our resident engagement structures, we've been having a specific on fire safety, and a number of our residents they are up as well. That their sort of it's and resident. Well,
And in addition to that, again, the focus, a lot of the focus is on the high-rise buildings, but a lot of what we do for high-rise buildings, we roll out for other buildings as well. But the high-rise buildings are in the focus and in the scope of the Building Safety Act. As part of that, for each of the 44 current occupied high-rise buildings, we have a resident engagement, a specific building specific resident engagement strategy. So it understands the people in that building, the culture, the use of the building, the specific physicality of the building, and our strategy is specific to that building and those people. It's not a generic one that goes across.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, so the doors and the 30 minutes fire resistant for the front doors, I mean, that was a problem over the UK. Everyone was buying doors and then discovering they weren't meeting the standards. So am I correct now to say that problem has virtually been solved within the UK? That doesn't happen anymore. And then slightly on the same subject, what happens if a leaseholder buys a door and you can see many leaseholders have put different doors on their flats, and I'm quite sure they don't all understand about it should have this certificate and all that. Does the fire risk assessor pick that up? And then the second point is, does it also pick up flats that have still got metal grills on their windows and doors back and front, which is a fire risk thing according to the fire brigade?
Yes, so grills, gates, and barriers on individual properties are picked up as urgent fire actions, and they're passed through to our tenancy management team, who will contact the tenant and, if necessary, take it to the point of serving a notice on them, and then they will arrange for our Haringey repair service to turn up with due notice, and we will remove those gates and grills straight away. The other question was about
Leaseholders buying their own front door.
Yes. So again, each door is inspected as part of the risk assessment. Within the scrutiny report, it sets out the different type of risk assessments that we do, and for all of our buildings over 5 stories or 11 meters high, we undertake the door inspections. So the annual door inspection and the quarterly communal door inspections, and as part of our general risk assessment, which looks at the communal area as part of our type 1, they will visually inspect doors, and they'll also do some door knocking to see if they can check the door. If as soon as they identify a door that's not felt to meet the current criteria, they'll put that down as an action. So we capture all those as actions. One of the things that Haringey's done in the past is it set a policy decision to have timber only fire doors, and the risk assessors have been raising actions against that. Now, that wasn't necessarily a regulatory standard, so we were setting a standard that was above that. So the amount of fire doors that have been identified to need replaced are against Haringey's policy, rather than necessarily always against the minimum standards or the building regulation standards. So Haringey's policy being higher standards than that. I think with regard to your other comment about whether or not the issue around doors being sold that are compliant, installed that are compliant nationally, I can't speak nationally, but I know that our standard and our specification for doors is that it meets the requirements and the regulations, that it has to be, I say we've said specified only timber doors, so we won't have composite doors, and they have to be primary certified, so that the whole door and everything on it has been fully tested with fire from both sides. So the quality and the standard of door that we will be fitting is well in line with the regulations and possibly above them.
Thanks. I just want to kind of zoom out a little bit again. So I think I think we would all accept that this is very much within the council's interest to get this right. Nobody wants there to be another Grenfell. We all want our residents to be safe. Is it fair to say that, which is partly related to the deputation, we are hemmed in by resource. We would like to immediately remove all potentially combustible cladding from all buildings, but we can't. And so instead, what we've done is prioritize the highest risk, make mitigations elsewhere. Is that fair to say? And are you able to give assurances that the level of risk that there is currently is tolerable, is legally compliant, and that it's adequately known? So, that residents realize that they are living in buildings that still have risk associated. Okay, we're going to adjourn for a second.
Mine's
I'll answer that
Yeah, sorry.
broadly is safety is always going to be the priority. We all know the political landscape for social housing going, back a long way. But we have a programme and we're doing the programme. And whilst it takes time to roll it out, because obviously procurement, etc., it takes quite long periods of time to do these things. So that's why we have to make sure that mitigations are in place so that although there are outstanding actions, people are still safe. I think if we are in a landscape of affordability, then it would be other programs that were lost rather than safety works.
So funding this is a priority. Would we be doing more if we could throw more funding at it? And this might be an obvious question.
Slightly coming. There's an amount of focus that can be had at any one time. So it's a bit of a deeper question, but if you want to come into.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this question's not unrelated to another item on the agenda, which is the housing asset management plan. So I think Councillor Williams is exactly right. We will always prioritise safety, and that's the number one priority. But I think there is an opportunity cost in a world where we're really constrained through, a decade of underinvestment in social housing, and that is about the money that we can put into our wider planned programmes that we're going to hear about in the asset management space, the money that we can put into retrofit, as an example. So we will always want to do more in those spaces, but we're going to be constrained. But the thing that we'll never compromise on or underinvest in is safety.
And then I just wanted to touch on the issue of obviously having contractors delivering things. Is it an ambition? Is it something we're working towards to have more of that happen in-house? And sort of how realistic is that and how achievable is that?
The quick answer is yes. And we've talked about which areas to work on first, which would be practical. We've had discussions around electricians, electrical safety, something that used to happen in-house. I don't know if, Scott, you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, just to say that we've got 2 vacant fire risk assessor and 2 vacant fire surveyor positions, which we've been out to the market a couple of times. We're about to go out to the market again, and then we may need to have a word with remuneration to see if there's anything we can do with those roles to try and attract. It's a very competitive market, and to get good people with the right level of experience and qualifications and competencies, we are in a very competitive market space. I think one of the things just to say about the supply chain and the consultants that we use, that is one of the key things that we looked for as part of the procurement was consistency. We didn't want somebody who just uses sort of journeyman surveyors who come and go and go to the highest, but we wanted they had to demonstrate that they had consistent staff who'd been working with them and they work with them a long time, rather than, as say, lots of companies who just hire the cheapest surveyor at the time.
Just make a point on this, which is that there is a massive skills shortage in the profession, and we are competing particularly with housing associations and also private sector landlords who can often have much more generous pay structures than local councils. So it does make it very difficult to recruit, and I think that is unfortunately one of the reasons that we have a reliance on external contractors. But again, this is not an area where we would want to compromise on the skill set. We need to get the best people to do this work where we can, and Scott is always trying to recruit as much resource in-house as he can, but we are in a really constrained place given the skills shortages that we've got.
Yes, Doris.
I think there are a couple of things. One issue might sound peripheral, but the fire risk assessments and the implications and mitigations are not just about what a flat is or what a block is or what is. It's also the way we manage it and who we put there. It's a matter of allocations, for example, as well. One of the things that always bothered me, and I want to ask where we are now, is putting people with mobility difficulties above third floor, for example, and then in case of fire, advising them to stay in, not to go out of their door until somebody comes to rescue them. Now, that is a horrendous, prospect for anybody. How are we dealing with that? Are we to minimize some of the some of the risk that way, because it doesn't seem to be part of that report, and fair enough. I mean, that's it. That's the thing. The other issue I was wondering about, and some people might think that's a bit provocative, but I think looking at the whole wood rather than just trees, and the resources issue made me think about it. A few years ago, there was a risk assessment and said a block or two in Broadwater Farm might collapse if a car loses control and hits the foundation or something to that effect. I'm exaggerating a bit, but that was the essence of it. As a result of that, we have spent probably going now for £100 million on replacing this and all that kind of thing, etc. But that was again about a risk assessment, about the whole thing. So there is a kind of an issue of how we approach the priority we give to something like this. I thought the original letter from the delegation kept on referring and it made me think a bit about life-threatening aspects of the whole thing. Now, I'm not sure whether we are actually differentiating about, how we prioritize, whether we are actually allocating whatever, again, against risk assessments, the results of risk assessments, whether we're allocating with a higher priority for those that are life-threatening, because on a lot of what I've seen here, it seems to be very hard to tell whether we're talking about life-threatening or something that might be causing some inconvenience or something like this, or damage.
I think the first question, Isidoros, was answered by Scott earlier on about stay put and the theories behind that. The first question you asked, I think, was answered by Scott earlier in his presentation about staying put rather than evacuating, wasn't it? Bill, coming on peeps.
Yeah, so in terms of people who aren't able to evacuate themselves, should they choose, so it's most of our properties are stay put anyway. So everybody would, unless you're in a communal area, if you're in your home and unless the fire starts in your home, then stay in your home is the recommended approach. Each of our buildings, and one of the items in the scrutiny report, it confirms that all of our buildings that require a secure information box have a secure information box in place, and that's a fireproof, security locked box that contains information about the building and, quite importantly as well, for the fire brigade. So when they get there on site, they open it up. It will have information where we are aware, as the building owner and the responsible person, that somebody in the building has or requires assistance in the event of evacuation. And the only way we can do that is through engaging with residents. So we can only find out if people need support or assistance or have mobility issues if they tell us. So in order to do that, our housing management team and the building safety managers in the high-rise blocks have engaged with residents to ask them to let us know if there's anything, if they would be unable to evacuate.
Sorry to cut you, just not to take very much time. This is the one side of the question. The other one is whether we have allocation policies now going to try to avoid placing or helping people to move out of high-rise rooftop floors if they have mobility difficulties as well, to reduce that is the one thing. And the other thing is how we handle when they are there in any case.
Yeah, I couldn't comment on the allocation policies. I don't know. I don't think we have. I would don't know enough about the allocation policies to be able to answer that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think we don't have the housing policy team here, but we'll take it away as a question and come back with an answer on that.
I'm going to have to draw this to a close now. So thank you, Scott. I think you're free to go now. And we will move on to the next agenda item, which is the housing asset management plan, where we are with that. And then we've also got a sort of particular subsection of that, which is about our climate actions and retrofitting. So, Christian, if you could introduce that, thank you.
Thank you. So I was asked to provide an update on the housing asset management plan. The paper covers the review of the asset strategy, which we undertook in Q3 of 23-24. And that was due to key drivers regarding our ability to deliver decent homes, building safety and compliance, which we've talked a lot about previously, and energy efficiency and carbon reduction. As a result of the review, which did include a resident engagement task and finish group, key changes were expanding and clarifying the prioritisation criteria for how we plan to reflect statutory and regulatory requirements, council priorities, and an overall aim of keeping our residents safe in their homes. We made amendments to the scope of decent homes standard in Haringey. We added a section on damp and mould, which is a key challenge for us at the moment, and improved on our commitment to resident communication and engagement. That new strategy was approved by Cabinet in December 2023. The paper includes a breakdown of the investment priorities and where we start and how we plan. So we start with statutory compliance, work through works identified through health and safety assessments, structural works, regulatory compliance, supporting council policies, including carbon reduction, and works down in that area. It then also covers the decent homes standard target, which we have agreed with the regulator, which, as you know, part of our self-reporting was on the basis of a failure to meet decent homes. And we have established and agreed a target with the regulator that by 2028 will be 100% decent. And the paper gives a target for each year and how we're going to achieve that 100%. And it also contains a breakdown of the planned programme for this year, including what we'll be spending on what is deemed major works, but that's investment works in our properties, together with what we'll be spending on the Cold 4 retrofit project. It also includes the 10-year investment plan, the council's commitment and approved budget for what we'll be spending on our housing stock over the next 10 years. And finally, it also contains an update on our partner in procurement strategy, which is looking at awarding. We have struggled with supply chain, and that has been a major challenge for us, and looking about how we're going to appoint 4 contractors, where the borough will be divided into 4 areas, 1 contractor per area, delivering all of our investment works over a long-term period.
Thank you. Can I just start by asking, so in the report and in the actual plan itself, there's a lot of reference to the kind of this sort of new strategic direction and how that responds to you know, various things with legislation on referral to the regulator, decent homes, damp and mold, climate targets and everything. Would you mind just sort of summarizing how that's different to what was before? Because I think it all feels like it makes a lot of sense, and it's very sensible. So how is it a change in direction to what came before?
I think it's more of an expansion of the existing process. We have just completed a targeted 100% stock condition survey program, which collected data of all of our properties. And I think we're just collating the last results. We hadn't done a stock condition survey prior to that, and before 2015. So there was a lack of accurate data on the condition of our stock, which prevented our ability to plan accurately. We set life cycles for all of the elements within a property so that we can plan our investment. So I think there was a lack of data. There was a lack of, for various reasons, partly financial, that we didn't have any sufficient supply chain in place to deliver it. And we also didn't have our prioritization was quite open, and therefore we wanted to be clear about how we're prioritizing work. So I think it's an expansion of what was already in place, but to improve it because it wasn't delivering what we needed.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, I've got 4 points. The asset management assessment, etc. Does it include the state of the declaration of our blocks? Because it's one of my pet subjects that I've got estates that haven't been decorated. I mean, all the communal areas since I've been a councillor and before. And looking at this, it doesn't seem to be part of the asset management check or report. And then the second point is we never spend the capital money every year. Many years we only manage to spend about half of it. Where are we on that? And then the third point is aids and adaptations, which is mentioned in here. I mean, the wait for aids and adaptations, it's just horrendous. It's years. I know we've got 2 teams. We've got a housing team and a social services team, both doing the same thing, which is a hangover from Homes for Haringey, I think. Why are they not being combined? Because it would seem logical to do that. And then you talked about the supply chain problems. The framework agreement, there's a timetable in here to complete the framework process to get that working. Are we going to meet that timetable? Because that's been ongoing for years and years as well.
I mean, slightly the communal decorations programme, which we're hoping to get, will come through Chris Vevlakis's team, more in the not in the major works team. Although, as you've seen yourself at Broadwater Farm, it's become part of major works on the internal corridors. I think you saw that the other day. Is that right? Yeah. God, there were a lot of points. I didn't write them down. Did you?
I think I did.
I'll let Kristen cover.
So, aids and adaptations, there are 2 teams. There is a commitment to fund it. They operate slightly differently. Aids and adaptations within adult social care look at requests for adaptations made by our tenants, and it goes through the process of assessment, and they may be grab rails through to level access showers. The housing occupational therapists are involved when we're delivering major works, and they are involved in carrying out assessments for where our residents have, where we're carrying out a work on a property that the resident is vulnerable, they will do an assessment and contribute to the plan for how we may change the design of the kitchen. It wouldn't be a standard installation or a bathroom. It might be a level access shower rather than the standard replacement. So I'm not sure what the future strategy will be, but they are slightly different things. Capital expenditure and spend, it is, you rightly recognise, a challenge in doing that. We spent £27 million last year. We have a target to spend. We're forecasting about £35 million this year. A lot of some of the delays are due to the supply chain and having to appoint, procure supply chain, which detracts from our ability to manage the work. It is always a challenge, but the 10-year partnering contracts that we're looking to introduce will give us the ability to give more work over a group of people to be able for us to deliver that. It is always a challenge delivering work, but we think we believe the plans in place will help us deliver that. And the partnering timetable, yes, there's been some slight changes in the timetable. The council has decided that we'll be going through the council's own framework, which is due to be let in August. We will then go out through our tendering in September. We have allowed a period of time for us to be able to finalise contracts once we've gone through awards. So we're looking at second quarter of 24, 25, or is it 25, 26, to be able to award it. But we are still on track to do that, and we won't be changing our strategy on that point.
Councillor Diakidis, did you want to come in?
Just on broad terms, first of all, can I say very much welcome the model about the decent home standards, because it's returned back to what we started from 15 years ago. John will remember very well, you were part of it as well, John, at the time. And I think it worked very well. And reading some of your comments here about the advantages, etc., it reminded me exactly our own old reports, why we did it. And it looked at the time very ahead of its time, but it did work, and it does meet the market. I won't go into the details about it, but one thing I wanted to ask is, when we introduced it the first time, we had elected tenants and leaseholders representatives, a structure, a method on it, who were included in the panel that was made the procurement panel, if I put it that way. And that did help tremendously. From the very beginning, because you're hinting somewhere here about how the contractors, they have an incentive because of our stability work, they can keep their good stuff, employee can, rather than keep on, temporary and all that kind of thing. But also it was this affinity with pleasing, especially the felt the requirement to please the tenants and the leaseholders, the users as well. And that was invaluable as well in itself, made the life much easier. So that is the one thing who would be, because you're referring to the stakeholders and, on various aspects there, on overseeing the whole housing development, asset management, and everything like this. Does that include as well tenants and leaseholders representatives? Just those stakeholders that we're talking about, that they're part of that working group, or I can't remember what you call it, the procurement consultants, working with the procurement consultants, etc. So that is the one broad area that I would like some comments about it, if you could. The second area, though, is about the relationship with, we have had all local authorities practically collapsed, basically, administratively during the big crisis and the austerity phases, etc. And we're rebuilding back. But there is now the opportunity, and you're doing quite a lot of it, David, and your people, etc., to get back to having the management information, the systems, etc. Now, part of looking at the future, how we spend, how much we need, is how we handle from now on things like the maintenance of our buildings. So what is the model that you're thinking at this moment in time here about cyclical maintenance and about the stock conditions sort of information, not to be something of whenever we need it desperately, we get consultants to do a survey, but it's built into the mechanisms of the council constantly. And that is one small question I want to ask, and I'm sorry I ask a lot, but what is this ominous sounding what is got a term that you're using, David, you're using there, is about, do you call it viability model of the stock viability model? What does that mean? Exactly, because it sounds a bit ominous to me.
To take your first point, we, as mentioned earlier, we did establish a resident task and finish group that were involved in the review of the asset strategy. It is a requirement within the cabinet paper that approved our long-term procurement strategy that residents were involved, and that is stipulated in the cabinet paper, and that's what we should be doing anyway, and we will be doing. So they will be involved in the procurement. It's also a requirement under the new legislation that we involve our residents in prioritisation and feedback on work. So that will be part, and David mentioned the resident engagement work that we've been doing and ensuring that we're aligned with that so that we can take input and involve them in what we're doing. So they are a key stakeholder, and they're, you know, this is about keeping our residents safe. This is what we're here to do. So that's stakeholders. Maintenance you mentioned, yes, we have, and there's evidence by the Decent Homes, we have a backlog of maintenance because of an underinvestment in the stock, particularly around, as you mentioned, that preventative maintenance, mechanical and electrical maintenance, etc., etc. So we are playing catch up, hence the need to be clear about prioritisation of works. Stock condition survey, we will be doing an annual rolling programme of stock condition going forward so that we don't ever get to the situation we are where we're not updating our data. And that will be, the intention is to have our own staff doing that, to bring that in-house. However, as has been mentioned, resources being as they are, we may have to outsource part of it at time to time, but the intention is we have our own surveyors doing validation surveys and stock condition surveys, a minimum of 10% per year. And we'll be starting this year, towards the end of the year, to start the first phase of that. Stock viability model, that just looks at what we're going to be investing in our stock over the 30-year planning period that we have as against the income, and is there things that we can do to reduce the number of repairs in the block, or look at way that we can make changes to the block. And we're looking at it with our void properties, street properties. We need to look at those particularly. Can we expand them? Can we extend them? Can we look at reconfiguring them to increase the bed size because we know we have a problem? It's things like that. It's looking at, when we get a property, looking at it, it's feasibility assessment really. What's it going to cost us? What works are required? What's the best way to utilise this property going forward? And it will link to our regen strategy because there may be things.
Point, just to be clear, it's not really meaning that we look at it and say, oh, that might be too expensive, we can't afford it, let's sell a few.
He's asking if it
Or sleeping that kind of
housing assets being sold off because they were too expensive to refurbish.
No. That's not what it is. No.
Should we really sell 5,000 of those?
No, that's not what it means. That's not what it's intended to mean. No.
I'm going to go to Councillor Hymas and then Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one was around the single contract arrangements and moving to the partnership kind of format. One of the problems we had in my ward in St Anne's was at Edgecote Grove, where there were major works that were promised, and then the contractor pulled out because they went insolvent. And then obviously residents are in a terrible situation where they've been told works are going to happen, they're not happening, and the problems are getting worse. So do you think that this joint partnership arrangement should prevent that kind of insolvency causing that disruption and allow us to better spend our capital each year?
Certainly that is the view. I think whilst we carry out financial checks and we do it up until the point that we award the contract, we can never know how solvent companies are. So the aim is to appoint large scale tier one contractors because of the amount of work they'll be providing to get competitive rates, but also in procuring it the way we intend to. There's no guarantee of work, so if they're not performing, we can always go out and find someone else to do some elements of work if they're not earning value for money. But yes, none of us want to go through the pain of appointing a contractor and then them going bust, because as you say, it's the residents that are disadvantaged, and we need to prevent that, which is why we want to go for these longer term models.
Yeah, that's useful. I think the proof of the pudding will be in whether we can actually spend our capital in the future financial years. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that in this. I also just wanted to ask briefly about the EPC work. So I think one of the things it says is that some of the funding that was given on the SHDF wave was around bringing homes up to the Energy Performance Certificate Band C. So I'm wondering whether the works that we are commissioning that you've stated are going to go above and beyond that minimum standard required by the funding.
Well, I think we perhaps want to cover most of that. Alf is going to do we're going to discuss the SHDF and the carbon reduction works.
I didn't realise there was a separate presentation.
No, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. We can.
So we can, if you want to pick that up a bit.
Yeah, all right. So we'll do a sort of brief section specifically on the climate stuff, if
Okay.
that's all right with
In
everyone.
that case, I'll wait because my questions are all in that
Okay.
section.
I'm going to go.
Any more questions from the panel? Yep.
Okay, just a quick one. In the report, it talks about the decent homes standard being the minimum standard, that in certain cases you would consider investing over and above the minimum standard. Is that being done simultaneously, or is it being done because in the table you show that by 2018, 2019, 27-28 is going to be completed. So are the additional investments being done within this timeframe or outside of it?
But the intention is that if we're doing work to properties, that we do as much as we can at the one time to avoid coming back and doing it again. So generally, yes, we will aim, if we can do it, we would do it at that time. We wouldn't be coming back afterwards and doing it. What we're talking about really is, looking at the property itself, and if we're going to do another work somewhere else in 2 years' time, we might bring it forward and do it then, so that we're doing it all at the same time. But yeah, it'll all be done at that time. Yeah.
Can I just ask for a bit of potential information? So the table at 4.6, is it possible to get like average investment per dwelling or something like that? Because I feel like because each locality has a different number of properties in it, just having the number of spend doesn't actually tell us that much. I don't know if I don't know if the data works in that way.
It would be difficult to do that because it's just we can tell you how we've come to that figure based on our stock data. It's based on what we think, based on our stock condition data, what we're predicting we need to spend in each area in order to deliver what we're intending to deliver. So I don't know if we'll be able to give an average because it might be different, because we might not have invested in some stock. Street properties can cost sometimes more than flats, or blocks can cost more because we've got to put scaffolding up, but we'll come back with some additional information, certainly.
That would be helpful, thank you. I also just wanted to kind of go back to the point about the viability assessment. So I think, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was sort of about, we're going to be prioritizing low risk, investments that are going to, pay off and they're low risk. And so there was reference to high risk and saying that those were the ones that we wouldn't be prioritizing. Could you just give an example of what that might be?
I think we're looking at it in terms of an options appraisal. So when we look at a property, we gather data on its investment, its state, its condition, its investment requirements, its income potential, as in what rent would come, and then looking at, are there things that we could do at low cost to improve the use of the property, maybe turn another room into a bedroom or extend it slightly. And therefore, I think what we're saying is that we probably wouldn't be spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on individual properties unless there was a really good reason for it. It'd be looking about how we can maximise it with relatively, well, it's value for money is what we're really talking about. But I think we perhaps need to make that clear when we update it.
All right, thank you. I think we'll move to the presentation about the retrofit now, if that's all right. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually just going to very briefly touch on the slides that I put in the agenda pack. So the Housing Energy Action Plan was agreed by Cabinet in January 2023, and it's referenced heavily within the asset management strategy. It sets out the strategy to retrofit our council stock based on the publicly available standards, PAS 2035 and PAS 2030 principles. So these are relatively new British standards. And the project, which I've put some slides on in the agenda pack, is government grant funded through the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. So in March this year, we obtained £1.7 million to support that scheme. The criteria is that we need to bring our homes up to EPCC. That's part of the criteria of the scheme. So with that, most of the properties that we picked are EPCD or below. In terms of progress, we have recently submitted a planning application for 2/3 of the properties in the scheme. We have got in and assessed around 175 of those properties. The last slide that I put in the agenda pack is a timeline to delivery, which is just this calendar year, and we're slightly behind as it's July. So Section 105 consultation should begin next month. As I said, planning application has only just gone in, and the procurement is also looking to be launched in probably September at this point. I'm happy to take any questions you might have on the information.
Thanks. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Alfie.
Thank you, Alfie. So I've got some questions, and I don't know if one of them might actually overlap yours now, Councillor Hymas, so please shout at me. The first thing talks about the climate change action plan is to get houses to EPCB, and in this circumstance, we're going for EPCC. Is that because that's what the government demands at this point? Then I have a bit of a suite of questions, but they're not, I don't think, too difficult. It's mainly around the deadlines. So obviously the deadlines for the money being spent are quite strict, and I know that if the money isn't spent in these situations quite often, then it just can disappear, which is always heartbreaking when you're delivering something that hopefully is good for residents. So are there any risks around that, especially when we consider things like there's skills gaps? Are the right people available in the right time and the right volume to meet those deadlines, and do we have contingency in? And then the final questions, which will be no surprise to David, relate to the work around the fabric first and the external wall insulation versus cavity wall insulation. And I assume external has been gone for partly because it's cheaper and partly because it has a lesser impact on the residents who live in the property. Will there be best practice comes out of this that would be useful for private residents to see who want to do similar to their homes, and also as guidelines and support for the owners of the 39 homes in the Coldfall estate, particularly, who won't be included in the programme, but may be very interested in doing that to their own properties should the opportunity arise, because I don't expect it to be cheap. And will there be a way to communicate benefits of the residents in their social homes to not only the people in Coldfall, but across the borough, to try to encourage those who do have the means to be able to do similar to their properties? And finally, can we make the plan permission allow them to do that in areas where there's protected regulations around what you can and can't do, like conservation areas, David?
Just going to go in sort of more lay. I'm sure Alfie will give you the technical detail, but I actually had a walk around Coldfall last week and had a look at the problems, and actually quite a few of the residents that own their properties there have already done exterior because the render's in such poor condition. Yeah. So just have interest in other people. Anyway, I'll let Alfie answer your questions.
Yeah, in terms of the housing injection plan actually says C by, it doesn't say it in the slides, but C by 2030, B by 2035, and then net zero by 2041. But you're right, it is to do with the government grant and the criteria there. You're also right to say that there are tight deadlines, and this is a common feature of social housing decarbonisation funding schemes. There are other councils that we're aware of that have also struggled to meet these deadlines in the past. We do meet with members of the scheme on a monthly basis and go through any risks around us meeting those deadlines. We are also we've laid out kind of an initial baseline plan of to spend that grant based on procuring at the in the next couple of months. We should still be able to meet that those deadlines. There is one deadline at the end of this financial year and then a second deadline at the end of the following. So we don't have to deliver all of those homes by the end of this financial year. In terms of the installation, with those on the Coldfall estate in particular, external wall insulation has been chosen essentially because they're solid wall, so they don't have cavities. There are some that are kind of on the end of Barringer Road that are 3 stories with room in roofs. They are cavities, but we would still opt to do external wall insulation on those. And in terms of on your point around, can we kind of take some of the lessons that we've learned in this scheme and move it elsewhere? Yes, definitely. That is what we need to do. We've got kind of lessons learned log that we're collecting as part of this project, which is also one of the objectives in the housing injection plan. And we're sort of treating it as a pilot essentially to scale up. The EPCC properties in Coldfall that are socially rented, we would look to do the same works essentially because we believe we could take them to a high C, but also as kind of part of a planned investment program. We might not go back to Coldfall for say 25 to 30 years, given some of the materials we're using, the windows, doors, etc. I think there was just one more around. Yeah, community. Do you want to come in, David? Okay. Just around the communicating the benefits as well to freeholders and neighbours, etc. I think that's something that we're going to try and do through the contractor and the design team, essentially by sharing the information that the design team put together, and then basically saying to the contractor to speak to neighbours, etc., to engage as we will engage, to kind of show what we're doing essentially in the costs and etc. Yeah.
We've had good conversations in the past where you've spoken to me about your desire that we're as kind of enabling as possible for planning policy around retrofit. And in fact, we've got an internal board on Thursday as officers where we're going to be reviewing the climate policies within the local plan. And one of the things that I know is in there is a retrofit first approach. And so basically we will try and be as enabling as we can through the local plan. I think it's worth saying that there is primary legislation around conservation areas that is very constraining, where the councils have a legal duty to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, which does constrain a lot of people from doing the kind of retrofit projects they'd want to do to their house. But that's a piece, that's something we have to comply with through primary legislation. But we you know, we're sitting outside of that constraint. We'll do everything we can through our local plan. And I'm sure I know the chair has talked to me about the fact that you as a committee will probably want to review the local plan at the right time. So I'm sure on your forward plan for this year, we'll be bringing the local plan and you'll be able to look at that in more detail.
Amy.
Yeah, trying to cover the question. I mean, I do think it's a bit of a shame in a way that we can't bring it up to EPCB in these works, but I understand maybe the limitations of the funding. When you talk about bringing the council stock to an EPCB average, how do you calculate that average?
So we have an energy modeling software system, which is like kind of it has all of our EPCs in there, and then also we have some properties that we don't have EPCs for, where we can make SAP calculations separately. So we have a good understanding of what our scores are across all of our homes. EPCB would be an average essentially of all of our stock. So yeah, the majority of our stock being an EPCB essentially. I think as it stands, we do have an average of C, but I'll need to check that and come back to you. But at the same time, we have lots of properties where we don't have energy performance certificates. It's not a statutory requirement currently. We are looking to improve that position.
Okay, so just to confirm, so you're saying the average, what you mean is actually a majority of properties in Haringey being EPCB rather than a kind of score which looks at all of them and is almost like a mean of those ratings?
I'll have to check what's in the Housing Energy Action Plan and come back to you, but I think it would be a majority of leading to an average, but I can come back to you on what's stipulated in the heap.
Yeah, that would be useful because I suppose my concern is that, and I know that in the action plan we talk a bit about wanting to target those properties that are obviously most leaky, where the costs of heating are going to be highest, and I recognise that, but I think there's also, you know, we need to put the social justice element into this and try and target properties in particular where we know that, you know, residents on estates where they maybe don't have the same level of kind of resources that other estates do. I think that's like really crucial when we're doing this. Also saying that we don't want, you know, a few properties that are E or D and then lots that are A or B, rather saying everyone moves at the same time. So I'm just making sure that we're embedding those inequalities into the process.
Yeah, just on that, in terms of one of the criteria for SHF schemes is that you assess fuel poverty across your stock as well. And that is how we would also look at work. So we're currently doing some work around the worst performing properties. So all of our E, Fs and Gs, desktop validating them, and then hopefully carrying out some surveys which will support future grant funding work. So that is essentially us looking at what are our kind of lowest performing homes to try and tackle some of those issues on fuel poverty.
And is the fuel poverty calculation solely a measure of the likely heating costs of a property rather than any other factors about the type of tenancy, say, or the kind of area or residency or employment levels in that area?
The way in which that's looked at is through a colleague whose name is currently escapes me, but it would be looking at the UK or the England, sorry, definition of fuel poverty, because there are different definitions in England, Wales and Scotland, but I can come back to you on that exact definition as well and how we source that information.
I just ask, and I don't know if it's one for you, Scott, or if it's a sort of broader question, but it's a great project, but these are quite small numbers, and we've got a really ambitious target, and we've got 20,000 properties in Harrogate. So I suppose the question is, are we on track? Can we deliver on what we want to do? And what are the plans to kind of scale up the numbers?
It's a very good point, but this isn't the only thing that we do. When we carry out investment works, installing new windows, roofs, boilers, doors, that will improve the carbon efficiency of the property as well. So this is one pilot of a scheme that we will be looking at to run in tandem and parallel with our other investment activity in order to get that. I think the challenge to get to EPCB is about technology around heating, which isn't really available yet. And if, the reliance on electric heating and the issues that would have caused. So I think we're on target. We don't just, we do these works, but we also do our ongoing investment because that will improve our efficiency on our EPC rating.
Yeah, I mean, I think Christian and Alfie have been outstanding at, applying for and securing the grant for the scheme that Alfie's talked about on the Goldfall estate, against a lot of competition nationally as well. The previous government set it up as a bit of a beauty parade, but the team have done very well to secure that funding. But there is a massive national, notwithstanding the points Christian's made about the wider programme having climate outcomes, there is a massive shortage of funding for retrofit nationally. I think it's something that the new government have signalled a lot of interest in what they can do to support councils to scale up. The Mayor of London is also planning a new London office for retrofit to look at these questions, including the question of skills as well, because there's a massive skills shortage in the retrofit industry. And obviously we would like to marry that up with like our local colleges around how do we get local residents to access those skills if we can scale up funding there as well. So I think there's a lot of focus on this nationally and regionally, but you are right to say that what exists currently is a bit of a drop in the ocean, albeit we've fought as hard to get our share of that.
Okay, quick one from Councillor Bevan, then we need to move on. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, we own all these, they're all freehold, so there's no problems there. What happens if some tenants say, I don't want all this hassle, and they refuse? Because I think that could be quite an issue, to be quite honest. So what's the procedure there? And I know in our new build we get feedback from when the tenants move in because they've got complicated heating systems and all that. Do we get feedback from each house that gets completed? Is it working okay? Have you noticed any improvements? Is this bit working, etc., etc.? And then I noticed on this report it says 39 self-funded. What does that mean? Does that mean we're not paying for those 39 or what?
Apologies, I think that might have been a.
But we could. So, but if they own their homes, we couldn't force them to do the work, then, could we?
No, those 39 are the EPCC properties, or when we started the project, that was our numbers essentially, that there are 212 in total, 173 that are EPCD and below, and the 39 at EPCC. So when we say self-funded, we're referring to ourselves as a council. Apologies on that. Were you finished with your questions, or I can, yeah. In terms of the dropout, people dropping out, we have noticed that there are certain people that don't want to have works. It is our job to try and convince them of the benefits, and also explain that there is some disruption involved. Part of the PAS 2035 process is that we carry out assessments. Essentially, that means the surveyor going to the home, explaining what a retrofit's involved. So even if residents are reluctant to have the works, we try and encourage them to have an assessment, because then they'll understand it a bit further and someone can speak to them within their own home. Regardless, we still have had opt-outs, and as we go through each stage of the project design construction, we will try and bring in as many of those opt-outs as possible, but there will come a point where the project needs to move on. The feedback process, and I'm assuming you're meaning in terms of making sure that the measures that have been installed are working as intended. The final stage of PAS 2035 is monitoring and evaluation, and that essentially means that there's a survey, a qualitative survey that's carried out with residents to make sure that their bills haven't increased, for example, that they understand how to manage their home and some of the new equipment. And we also have consultancy support to help with that process as well.
Thank you. I'm going to close this item now. Thank you so much for your presentation. The next item is about our home ownership services. If that's not relevant to you, you're free to go. And Suzanne, I'm really sorry that you've drawn the short straw, but thank you so much for bearing with us. And yeah, if you'd like to present this item.
Thank you. So this report is an update on the improvements that are being made for our leaseholders within the borough and within the home ownership service. And the focus of the report is the key improvements that are being delivered under the housing improvement plan. So the key areas are reducing the level of debt. So I've set out our performance for last year versus this year. Service charges, improving the accuracy of our service charges, how we calculate them and how we bill them. So we're currently using manual systems to do that, and we are going on to our housing system moving forward to produce them. It's about ensuring regulatory compliance, which runs through our policies and procedures and all of our statutory duties within the team. And the fourth area is improving resident satisfaction. So I'll take any questions.
Thank you. First question from me. So is there currently an SLA that a leaseholder has which kind of dictates, for your service charge that you pay, this is what you can expect from the council, this is how often communal areas should be maintained, and kind of is that something that they have and they have access to, and so they can kind of keep an eye on whether it's happening as it should be?
Yes, everything is set out in the individual leases of what we do and when and how we do it. The detail of, for example, what day your cleaner comes and what time, that can be provided. It's put up on our notice boards and it's general information, but that's not publicised as such, but people request it. And most of our local residents associations and blocks have that information. So the lease sets out broadly what we do, and then our service standards are provided individually.
So everyone will have a pretty good idea of what they're entitled to based on their service charges, and that'll go down to kind of how often things are maintained, how often things are fixed, all these things.
Yes, so when we send out the service charges, there's various sort of frequently asked questions, and all that information is available on the website or within the questions. If it's a very specific question, we have a dedicated inbox and phone lines that they can contact us and ask.
Thank you. So in the report, you mentioned that the leaseholder continuous improvement group identified a few key issues, and those were around service charges, policies and procedures, and repairs. I just thought it might be helpful if you could say kind of what the issues actually were that they were sort of most concerned about.
For service charges, they wanted much more transparency, and they wanted it modernised. So, for example, we used to send out, we won't this year, we send out a huge booklet all printed and sent to people. So it's about modernising that and making the costs more transparent. With repairs, it was a general dissatisfaction that they weren't carried out on time. And there is a resident task and finish group specifically for the repairs, and one of the leasehold CIG group is on that and feeds back to us. And what was the final issue?
It was policies and procedures, I think.
Yes, because they were aware that there wasn't a sort of consistency of approach before. So they had stories of somebody was allowed to do this, somebody was allowed to do that. So yeah, it was about standardising the service and professionalising it and ensuring it was fit for legislation and leaseholders.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Dawn first.
Thank you. I just wanted to look at some of the policies to be developed and ask how much input the leaseholders will have around or into those. So there's one about service charge collection, service charge hardship, major works, get a lot of casework around that one, and sinking fund management. And also the leaseholder AGM, will a council officer be attending those? Or do they already? The last one I went to, they didn't. That was about 6 years ago, just to be clear.
Could you put your mic on, please? Your mic on.
With regard to the AGMs, the CIG meet quarterly. I presume you mean the AGM is the Haringey Leaseholders Association. So that's separate to the continuous improvement group. Yes, they still meet annually, and yes, a member attends as well. What was your first question, sir?
The other question was about the policies. It says that there's been a delay in the recruitment of the policy officer, but I wondered how much input leaseholders might have to those before they're agreed.
Each of the policies will be signed off by the CIG group before they are in use. So they'll have scrutiny of them and they'll have input into them. And that's our commitment to them as a group.
I think Isidoris was next, then I'll go to John.
Thank you. Let me start by saying I'm a bit rusty on this issue. I haven't been as with what's happening for the last few years, so I might ask for some naive questions. But first of all, on the issue of the service charges in general, both to tenants and to leaseholders, from simply the word casework, to get a lot of complaints where people say, I've been charged for something. It says £5 for cleaning the thing, etc., every 6 months or every 3 months, and we've never seen them and all that kind of thing. And of course, we pass them simply as councillors' queries or complaints or something like this. But I wonder, how are we monitoring these at the moment, whether we are complying and whether they are accurate, our estimates, etc., and whether they have some idea about how many complaints do we get and whether and how do they compare with other authorities, for example, or that kind of thing. So that is one issue. Again, it might be a very obvious thing, and there is a direct answer, but years back, before all this meltdown of local government services, we had a sinking fund arrangement for leaseholders where they may pay in advance, like bit by bit. So every 5 years, when the cyclical maintenance or the big contracts are coming, they had already prepaid some money. And if they leave before, they could get all this money with interest back, that kind of thing. And that helped in easing off the pressure, because sometimes when you have an estate improvement program, you could add up 40,000 bills or 50,000 bills, something like this. So that way, is there something similar at the moment? Is there something that is, in the current circumstances, we could see as credible and workable, if you like, today? And as regards the leaseholders representative group, there is, I know it's a naive question, but we've got one borough-wide, which is recognized by the council and with which are our partner, and they have rights of being consulted and all that kind of thing. Am I right? I mean, just if you bring me up to date on that one. Thank you.
So with regards to inaccuracies in the service charges, we have a manual system still. I understand in previous years, there was inaccuracies because of the repairs section, for example. Items that had been works inside people's homes had been recharged. I know that was an error around 3 years ago. That doesn't happen now, and we have put processes in place, so there shouldn't be as many errors as previously. We've also set up a dedicated service charge mailbox, because we do have and expect a large volume of inquiries at those 2 key points in the year. So we've made it much easier for our leaseholders to contact us.
Just a bit linked my question to what Alexandra was the chair was pointing out earlier on. I think if you put a figure, we break down the figure of the service charges and you say, and so many pounds a week, because we will clear your staircases every week. or we will clear the paths to the garden, the communal garden, every so often, etc., and not been doing. And people saying that's what I'm talking. How do we ensure that is the monitoring to reduce this? Because I don't know how many there are across the borough, but from the casework, simply from people coming complaining, or when you make a state visits, especially in the communal things, really, the estates and the blocks, then you do get too many of those complaints.
So we carry out regular estate inspections throughout the year. So it should be the case that we would notice if something wasn't happening. We do, if we aren't made aware of it ourselves by spotting it, somebody would call in and let us know. Generally, if a service isn't provided, so for example, if it's from a contractor, if the service isn't provided and carried out, we wouldn't pay them. So therefore, we wouldn't pass the costs on. And if it's, sorry. Well, we would have evidence of the invoice or the cost that we had incurred, and we would pass that on. So leaseholders challenge us with that, and we show them every invoice that it relates to. With our estates team, we have timesheets from all of our operatives, anybody on an agency. We know the exact costs to each service, so they can drill down into that. And some leaseholders do come into the office and look through that detail, but we can always provide that. And you mentioned sinking funds. We have the ability to collect for a sinking fund, and I believe we did in a period of time, and that isn't our process at the moment. But it is something that we're looking into, and it's a sensible idea for us to ask for the money in advance for works that are coming up. So it's something that we could potentially bring in, but we would do that in consultation and, if appropriate, where there was major works being carried out. So the HLA, the Haringey Leaseholders Association, we do consult with them, and they are recognised by us. But the continuous improvement group is separate to them and works specifically with myself and my team to generate improvements, whereas the Haringey Leaseholder Association are independent and they decide upon their own agenda and what they wish to do. But we do still work with them. And there's a representative from the HLA who sits on the CIG, and she reports back. So we do work together, even though we're not the same.
I think Councillor Hammers just had a follow up on something that's been mentioned. It was John Bevan next then. Sorry, there's a queue.
Yeah, I don't know if leaseholders are made aware consistently of the permissions they need to get if they want to do work, because that is a huge issue. Now, I'm not quite sure if it's such a big issue now, because my understanding is the permission for leaseholders to replace double glazing and doors was withdrawn, that they cannot make that application now, so they cannot do that work on themselves. I'm not sure if they all know that, because obviously some of them do things. So the issue with front doors being replaced, in theory, they cannot do that because that permission has been withdrawn. So am I correct in that? Because that's quite a good move, to be quite honest. The Haringey Leaseholders Association in the past, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this question, has been really problematic. There's been lots of legal cases. You wouldn't believe it. So could you say now that the relationship is better with them? And then the last point, there's a block on my estate called Brewery House, which was built by the council, and it had part ownership in it. And when we was building that, we realised our estate services would really have to up their game so that they could operate like, professional managing agents. So Brewery House, I think the residents have taken the council to the ombudsman because they just got so confused and so fed up with everything. And one of them actually told me she was selling up and moving house because she just couldn't stand it any longer. So I don't know if that case has come across your desk, Brewery House. Perhaps you might like to do a bit of research on that.
So the first point regarding leaseholders and alterations, we have a leaseholder alterations policy which is available on our website. And essentially they have to ask us permission. There's a fee for that permission. We ensure that the works are correct and carried out responsibly. And you're correct, there was a cabinet decision that we would not allow replacement windows and doors, and that's still in force. But yes, leaseholders do sometimes replace without our permission, but we can take enforcement action when they do. We mentioned the gates and grills and the doors earlier, so it isn't just the tenants' gates and grills that we're removing. My team are running the same project with our leaseholders. So we're asking them to remove them themselves, or we're removing them, or we're taking legal action. So it's the same process. So the Haringey Leaseholder Association, I've been here a year and a half, so I can't comment on the past, but I am aware that they've been in litigation with us and it's been over a decade. I think the relationship potentially is perhaps better because we've stepped away and been separate from that. So that's not within my discussions with them. I've been very clear that I can't discuss that and won't discuss that. So I would say I certainly have a cordial relationship with them. I'm invited to their meetings. So that's all I could say about that really. And I'll come back to you on Brewery House. Thank you.
Tammy.
One of the concerns that has come to me a few times as a councillor is around the tenants of leaseholders in Haringey blocks. One issue was that the leaseholder landlord had an issue with the lock. The tenants were saying, why can't you change the lock on the door? The leaseholder was saying, well, because the council need permission. And there's a real breakdown of communication there because the tenant isn't actually raising it with the council themselves. So I'm just wondering how you are engaging with tenants. And I guess kind of related to that, you also talked about a policy for a hardship fund for leaseholders. And I know that that problem is even more pronounced for tenants in leasehold flats who, are struggling with very high rents very often in Haringey. So I'm wondering whether that hardship fund also extends to those tenants. And kind of finally related to that, are you kind of in conversation when you have, intel that comes to you about ways in which some leaseholders might be behaving and whether you're reporting that onto the private sector enforcement team?
Thank you. So all leaseholders have the right to rent out their homes under the terms of their lease, but they do it, or they should do it with our permission. And we hold a database of the tenants that are within our buildings. The relationship as landlord and leaseholder remains the same. So Haringey continue the relationship with the leaseholder legally. So if there was an issue with the tenant, we would take that up with the leaseholder because they're at risk. The tenants are breaching their lease. So we would take it up with the leaseholder directly legally, but we would still address the tenants as part of our community and deal with their behaviour as well. Does that answer your question?
The question's more the other way around, I guess. The question is more about, not tenants behaving badly, but the fact that leaseholder landlords often are behaving badly and they're not doing works which need to be done, and how you're kind of monitoring that and making sure that you're doing the works that tenants request.
I mean, I think that's very much the work of the private sector housing team. So obviously their relationship with landlords, including problem landlords, and taking action where people are behaving badly. And you are right, there are landlords that behave badly. Obviously we've got the private sector licensing scheme, and that would apply to leaseholders who are landlords as well. I mean, one of the problems we've got is that we don't, unlike with tenancy checks, we don't sort of go and do those kind of checks with private sector tenants, but the private sector team will pick up on issues where they're aware of them, and they will run their checks as part of the licensing scheme as well. But it doesn't happen through the leasehold team because they don't have a relationship with the tenants. That's the landlord's responsibility. Our relationship is with the leaseholder.
No, that's fine. I guess maybe that kind of picks it up on my last point, though, is about the importance of information sharing, and making sure that you're aware. You know, you said you've got your legal duties to engage with the leaseholders, but you also keep a list of tenants who are staying there, and just being not a list.
I think what we're saying is that there should a good landlord would have informed the freeholder that they're letting the property.
Right.
But there's no relationship between that, whoever it's then rented to. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. The one place that we would have details of the tenants are if we have placed them through Denise Gandy's team in temporary accommodation, which we do also do. So we have people that we place in temporary accommodation in leasehold properties that have been let back to the council. But that would be the one time we would have information on the tenants if we basically performed that role.
Yeah, sorry. So as a follow-up then, if a good landlord who is also a leaseholder tells your team that they are renting out the property, does your team provide that information to the private rental sectors? They can cross-reference it with the landlords who should be registered. That's your question, right?
Yeah, apologies. So we were talking at cross purposes. So some of our leaseholders just rent out their flats, which was my response, and we have other managing agents and landlords that manage us. We do have a relationship with the managing agents and some of the landlords, and we would, if things were brought to our attention, we have a sort of professional conversation with them and say we understand these standards, but we don't have any authority over them other than to report them.
But then that list of those responsible landlords who've said to you, I'm renting out my leasehold property, that's shared with the appropriate private rental team for the monitoring if they're in part of the borough where they have to register.
Yes.
Can I ask, so I feel like from my own casework and stuff that I've heard, because of the position that leaseholders are in, you sometimes end up in these positions, and also because of the challenges in our repairs service, you end up in these situations where somebody's like, I need this repair to my roof, or this communal area, or this part of my building that the council is responsible for. I really, really need this done. Otherwise, I'm failing my responsibility to my tenants, or otherwise my insurance won't pay out. And that becomes quite a specific escalating issue if our repairs service can't get it fixed, if it's some kind of complex repair, if it drags out over years. And sometimes people say, can't I just fix it myself and get reimbursed by the council? And I just wondered if the improvements that we're trying to make sort of take that into account and try to embed a bit of flexibility, and into how we deal with those kinds of situations.
It's difficult because we can't allow, unfortunately, we can't allow any leaseholder to carry out any works to the communal area, regardless of whether it's their profession, etc., etc. So it always comes to Haringey to do those communal works.
But like, not if it was them doing it, but if they managed to find a contractor who could do it more quickly than the Haringey repairs.
I think we'd be open to that discussion, but it would be certainly with my colleagues in building safety, definitely. And sometimes in much smaller buildings that can work, but we really would have to look on a case by case basis. And most of the time we have to say no, if we're honest.
I think I'd be a bit stronger on that. I think we have a lot of issues with when people do their own works and then cause leaks. That's a bit my casework at the moment, is somebody who keeps doing their own work and it's leaking to next door neighbours and stuff like that. So I think getting the repair service in shape is what we've been doing. And I think that would be the priority rather than looking at a change in policy that would probably have a unintended consequence, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I suppose I'm just getting at those situations where, because of the repairs service, it escalates and it maybe then becomes another legal issue or, yeah, media thing. I suppose it's just being mindful of managing that, but it does all go back to the repairs, being able to do them, as you say. Any other questions from the panel?
Just 18% satisfaction level. Is that, I don't know what it means. Is it the worst in the country, worst in London average? I mean, and are we improving on it?
It's probably not the worst in the country. Leaseholder satisfaction is always considerably much lower than tenants. It's poor, I would say. It's the lower quartile. And hopefully these measures we're putting in place will improve it. That's our aim, to improve that satisfaction.
How often will we getting updates on what the satisfaction levels are?
We carry out an annual survey.
So at 4.26, where you're speaking about the different policies that are being reviewed and developed to improve everything, there's mention of the responsive repairs policy and clarifications on the leaseholder and landlord responsibilities. Could you just expand on that a little bit about what that's going to achieve?
I think the policy wasn't clear enough of what is and isn't our responsibility. So we've made that much clearer. We also had some feedback from the Ombudsman regarding through our complaints process, and they criticised us for not being very clear about what should be an insurance claim and what shouldn't. So we really clarified that as well. So it was really just making it crystal clear and adding in the section that said for leaseholders, this is what you can do. But it was specifically the insurance and just being much clearer on what was and wasn't their responsibility.
Thanks. I think I'm going to close this item unless anyone else got a burning question. No. All right. So thank you so much, Suzanne and David and Sarah and Christian. Thanks everyone for staying to this point. And Alfie as well. The next item is about our work programme update. So I'll just hand over briefly to Philip. I'm very happy for this to be a mostly offline discussion. I just wanted to say as well to the rest of the panel that I am meeting with David tomorrow to discuss our sort of agenda setting. So anything that you can send me before then would be really helpful, just as priorities. Philip, is there anything else you want to say before?
No, I was just going to say, before we get onto the work programme, we probably just need to go back to the minutes with us moving the agenda around. We didn't actually agree the previous minutes.
Oh.
So if I can ask members to agree them for accuracy, and if there's any points they would like to raise.
Yeah. Are we happy to agree the limits of last meeting? Yeah, great. So yeah, people can send me suggestions in writing, but if anyone wants to say anything now.
Can I just say about the issue I raised about the park service maintaining our estate, especially our new build where we're doing a lot of landscaping. If we carry on like we are, it's not going to stay as it is. You get whether we can do a review on the park service, how it's operating on our estates. And then another thing, I was thinking the out of hours service that relates to housing. I'm not convinced it's operating clearly for residents. I'm just wondering whether, say 5 of us could do a call to the out of hours service about housing. Say we've got an address and a flood, and see if we get to the end. Well, if we get to the end, then we'd have to tell them this is a test case. Don't send anyone. But I'm just not convinced it's working right. Because when I did use it, it still referred to Homes for Haringey, and that was only a few months ago. And I've had issues with tenants as well. So whether we could each do a phone call and log it, or it's just an idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the ethics of secret shopper, but I'll take it away. I take your point. It's something we should look at. Oh, Tammy, did you want to say something?
also just mention that we had found some data about private sector rental enforcement earlier this year, which said that Haringey was still underperforming. Obviously we had our private renters scrutiny review, and I don't want to flog a dead horse too much. Well, not a dead horse, an important horse. But I'm wondering if we can have an agenda item in the future that looks at how the statistics have changed, and maybe just gives a sort of overview of the monitoring there, especially looking at like HHSRS inspections, civil penalty notices, any rent repayment orders, for example.
Yeah, I think it might not even need to be a full agenda item, because I think we might be able to have some quite specific data that we can receive attached to something else. But I think we need to close that feedback loop in terms of that article. I'm just conscious of how many things we need to look at, and I'm not sure I would bring another agenda item on private renters quite so soon. But I think there's another way that we can get that information formally.
Well, if I mean, I could have my email responded to, which doesn't just say we're talking to you.
Sorry?
I mean, we could also just they could also respond to the email I sent properly, rather than just saying we're going to speak to the chair about it.
Yeah, well, we did, I did speak to them about it, and there were some further follow-up actions from that, so I'll chase it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on a different slightly subject I wanted to raise. Appreciate that I haven't been member of the panel, before, for a long time. So I've noticed that, for example, tonight's meeting, some pretty good discussions. I've learned a lot as well, but I don't think. Where is the meat, if I put it that way, as a scrutiny? Where did we hit that we demanded some change or something, or queried? Were we happy with all the things that we had? There isn't very much tonight. There wasn't very much of this emphasis on getting some change, scrutinizing, rather than simply hearing the answers and everything like this and just let it and say, fine, go through. And I noticed that we have still, Philip, the action tracker, yeah, which although this one that I've seen this time is only from the last meeting. What about previous ones? Have they all been actions? And will there be any action from tonight's meeting, for example, for the next one?
Yes, obviously with the start of the new year, I've put the actions from the previous meeting on here as to report back on the actions at the last meeting.
Yeah.
As far as I know, the actions from previously have been completed, but I'll look into that. But yeah, I guess in the interests of keeping things tidy and easy to follow at the start of the year, like the action tracker will keep all of the actions for this year, and then we'll report back when they're done, and then obviously for next year we'll sort of move on. I mean, having a sort of 5 years worth of actions isn't really very practical. Yeah.
Again, there might be some questions about what the response has been here, but I don't think. Well, it's our fault as members, but we didn't ask anything. To say, are we satisfied with the response? that kind of thing. I know it's a big generic thing, but that is my impression from.
Just to add to that, I mean, obviously we had the deputation. I was wondering whether it's possible, and it should be, to take forward what they've requested, which is to ask the leadership of the council, or maybe even as a panel, to lobby the government for additional funding that's required, and also to ask the question about where they allege that the information is not open and it's not frank, to ask that question.
And also, they also said to list what actions had been taken since Grenfell, which again wouldn't cost any money. That was the third thing I noted down they asked for. So could we just get that list?
So that we can get it
along with what you've just said.
Yeah, and then we can provide a response to the deputies to say, this is what we've done.
Yeah, can I just, so my personal view on that, I don't support an action to ask the leadership to lobby the government, because I think when we think about our relationship with lobbying the government going forward, it has to be a lot more, we have to be strategic and think about what our priorities are rather than, you know, I think even accepting the premise that we need more money for fire safety actions, the responses we got from officers and the cabinet member was essentially to say, this is the one thing that we are essentially fully funding, and if anything, if anything was going to be cut, it would be other things. So I don't necessarily accept the premise that it's like, I don't know, like I feel like there would be other priorities that we would be asking for funding for. So I think it's a little bit reactive personally. And I personally, I feel like they gave quite a lot of information about how residents know about what is already happening in their blocks in terms of the fire risks. I do agree with the recommendation about asking for a more kind of clear breakdown of what has happened and where the financing has gone since Grenfell. And obviously this is a democratic panel, so if people disagree with me, that's fine. But I wouldn't want to just put a recommendation forward about lobbying the new government solely off the back of this. I feel like that's kind of a more strategic and wide-ranging decision about the relationship we have with the Labour government going forward and where we focus our kind of opposition.
Could lobby them to reinstate the 100,000 homes for London instead of the reduction to 80 they've just done.
No, I think like, I take on board what you've said, but I think at the same time, can we have an action to find out what is the, so if what they're saying is not true or is not entirely correct, so can we have the correct information? They're saying that there is underfunding, that we don't have the level of funding that's required to do the level of remedial work that's necessary. So that's a statement they've made. Now, I don't currently have information before me to say whether they're correct or not. So can we actually get some, you know, understanding of where?
I'm sorry, I was just saying there has been previously email correspondence between the officers and the deputation party, which was sent round to you via email. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. There are pretty detailed responses in there. It might be worth just having a look through that and then.
Does it deal with this specific question?
But can I just come in? I've read all of that correspondence, and I do think, you know, if the allegation is we don't have the funding to do this or we're not funding this properly, I don't think that is like kind of exclusively addressed. So I think in terms of the response we get to the deputation, we could ask for a kind of very clear, you know, this is our position on that, as well as the, you know, actions of what's happened since Grenfell, because I feel like those are the two pertinent things. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I think we should at least, you know, get some more clarity, some more information, and then if possible, also write to them and say, look, you brought the deputation, this is the information that we've been able to gather.
Right, so is it worth, after this meeting tomorrow, emailing the cabinet member and the officer and asking for a written response to those 3 points?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one thing which I think will come forward anyway, but David Joyce referenced that plan that's been rewritten and that should come to this panel. We have asked for it. So just to make sure we do get, that's the ticket. I couldn't remember the word right then.
Yeah, the reason it hasn't come forward yet is because it's been so delayed.
My point isn't that it hasn't come because it's delayed. Yeah. It's that we just need to not forget to see it at the appropriate time.
Yeah. And I think the fact that it's been so delayed is notable in and of itself. Yeah. But yeah, it does need to come to us. Right, can we close this item?
Almost very quickly, just to flag that as part of the process for developing a work programme for scrutiny, we are going to be having a scrutiny survey put online, hopefully very soon, by next week, hopefully, and we'll be asking members to pass that down through their networks and asking people to respond to it. That survey will feed into a sort of what we're calling a scrutiny cafe event. Yes. Yeah, so it's a sort of public consultation engagement, kind of a cup of coffee, meeting people, asking them what they want scrutiny to look into, kind of occasion. So it's just to flag that up, and more details will follow.
Thanks. Yep.
the Scrutiny Cafe last time was like during a work day. Is it going to be during a work day again?
So we put it on a Friday. Yeah, we put it on. I mean, so obviously having it at the weekend is advantageous for some people who work during the week, but obviously people whose kids are in school during the week, not so much. Yeah, there are pros and cons to both. I think the idea was having on a Friday time to be concerned, time to be confirmed. If we had it in the afternoon, that might be, you know, the least worst option. But I'm open to.
I mean, I would. I mean, yeah, I think it would be important to have it at a time that people can attend because, yes, they might have kids at school, but you know, people also tend to work on a Friday as well, not just councillors. It feels like to me doing it on a weekend would encourage better attendance personally.
I think it's worth noting that this time as well, they are going to be running a survey alongside the event itself, which at least will capture slightly more, you know, people who wouldn't necessarily be able to participate in person on a Friday. But yeah, I do agree with the premise of what you're saying. Okay, there are no items of urgent business. And just to note, the future meeting dates. So the next one is on the 26th of September. Yeah, thank you. Oh. Oh, it says 26th, I think. 26, yeah. All right, meeting's over. Thank you, everybody.